to get donors or for me to continue the steps. I didn't come out with one donor. I had two exactly matched donors, and then I had three.
Wow. That's rare, isn't it?
That's exceptionally rare. Exceptionally rare. So we had the donor, and I was doing research at that time with the bone marrow registry. And the bone marrow registry actually has statistics on the success rate of bone marrow transplants. Now, bone marrow transplants are now called stem cell transplants. It's essentially the same thing. So I got the data from the bone marrow registry, and I was checking hospitals. Everybody says, well, you don't go to Hopkins, right? I said, well, I checked all the statistics in early 1999. Hopkins' statistic for my leukemia was not very high. The hospital that had the highest rating for my leukemia, and all leukemias for that matter, is Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center in Seattle, Washington.
Oh my.
That was the research center that developed bone marrow transplants in the 60s.
Wow.
So through prayer with the healing team and with Peggy and the family, we decided that we wanted to go to Seattle for the transplant. And we did. But in order to get into the transplant program in Seattle, they required me to come there for an examination and to discuss it. So we flew early in '99 to Seattle, Washington, just for a 3-hour meeting. I got so frustrated at this meeting because they took us on a tour of the bone marrow with the little kids that were getting their transplants. I got so upset. I told Peggy when they were finished with me, I want to leave, I want to get out of here, and I want to go to Garden Grove, California. I want to go to the Crystal Cathedral. To the Crystal Cathedral, because before we went to Seattle, and it was a day that I went to Hopkins for a second opinion about the bone marrow transplant. We were at Hopkins all day, going through testing, and came home. I was emotional. I was just wrung out, and it was late. Peggy said it was like 7 o'clock. We were just talking about this, and I was in the bedroom resting, and the phone rang. I answered the phone, and this man was on the phone. He said, how are you? I said, well, I'm not doing too well right now. And he says, well, I said, who are you? Where are you from? He said, I'm brother so-and-so, and I don't remember the name, from the Crystal Cathedral.
Wow.
Now, he talked to me, from the Crystal Cathedral. He talked to me. Peggy came in, she was right there, and he says, would you like to pray? I said, absolutely. This man prayed with me for like 10 minutes. I said, how'd you come to call? Oh, well, we do calls out to people that have helped us, because I had made donations to the Crystal Cathedral. So, okay. So we go to Seattle for the meeting, like a month later, and I said, I want to go to the Crystal Cathedral. I want to see it. We went there. They have tours where somebody will take you on a tour. Mm-hmm. So the man that took us on a tour, he says, what else can I do? I said, well, brother so-and-so, and they have this high tower that they do income, people that need prayer call in. And it's a high tower. I said, brother so-and-so called me on the phone. And he said, he called you on the phone? I said, yes. And Peggy said, yes. And he said, well, let me go over and see, but they typically don't make outgoing calls. They go over, he actually brought down a manager and said, we have no one by that name. We have no one by that name, and we don't do outgoing calls. Now, I've never found out about this phone call, and it happened. So,
wow.
And Peggy was there.
So how do you interpret that?
God.
Yeah.
I believe God has a plan for everyone before they're even conceived. God knows everything that's going to happen in your life. God knows every cell in your body, and He knows the outcome of your entire life. And I believe it was part of the plan for me. And I don't know when my plan is going to be, what the goal is. So I continued on treatment until the transplant was set up. We left in July of '97, Peggy's birthday. We flew to Seattle, and we rented an apartment for 5 months. At that time, you had to stay and be an outpatient for that period of time. We rented an apartment for 5 months. It took 2.5 weeks. We moved into an apartment. Just got moved in. Bought a new computer. Rented everything we needed. Went, and they were going to put me in the hospital on a Wednesday. And on Tuesday we were meeting with a transplant doctor to fill out protocols for clinical trial stuff. And the meeting was to be like at 1 o'clock. They kept delaying the meeting. Peggy and I were sitting in the outpatient waiting room from like 1 o'clock. They kept delaying the meeting. We didn't see the doctor until 6:30 in the evening. And Peggy and I are sitting in the room. Peggy takes notes of everything that's said. The doctor comes in, she's writing notes, and the doctor sits down. He says, I've been in the lab looking at your bone marrow smears. I looked at Hopkins, and because they were doing them on me out there, he says, I looked at the one from here. I can't explain it. All but 5% of your cells have reverted back to normal. And Peggy says, what'd you say?
Yeah, I bet.
And I said, well, what now? He says, you need to go home, get back on treatment. I said, well, wait a minute. Well, I'm here. Can't we just go ahead and get it over with? And he says, no, you don't want to do that. Because
it's like you don't need it.
Right. He says, you do not need it. You need to go home, get back on treatment, the same thing you were on, and then we'll go from there. So we went home, and I called Father Joe that night. He was not in. Father Paul answered the phone. I said, I need to speak with Father Joe. And Paul says, well, he's not here. I can give him a message. I said, well, please give him a message and call me at this number. Or on my cell phone. I don't know what it was. I didn't have a cell phone at that time. So Father Joe calls late at night. And Father Joe says, well, I told him, I said, I'm here. They're telling me my cells are reverted back to normal, except like 5%. And he says calmly, he says, well, what did you expect? So, Father Joe and Jackie Ann Koviak and the Home Healing Ministry, I believe, were very instrumental in my healing. Essentially, I was healed. No one has an explanation of why my cells went from 100% of that leukemia, which is called Philadelphia chromosome, to just 5%. And I just looked at a report today from Hopkins that it was actually 100% before I went, and it was only 5% when I was out.
Well, I think you have an explanation.
I do.
They might.
Peggy did. Right. And Peggy said, and the doctor says, we have no explanation. Peggy says, we do. So,
wow.
But the healing ministry, and especially Jackie Ann Koviak, Brian Masterson, Clemmy Panella, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Father Joe, he walked me through the whole process.
Yeah.
It was amazing, and there's one other thing. It's like I'm going on.
Well, in a nutshell, what you're telling us is that God works miracles, God heals, prayer works, right?
Prayer definitely works.
What would you add to that?
The only other thing I want to mention is that Jackie and Father Joe especially recommended that I go through the healing anointing of the sick. Okay, so Peggy and I decided, well, we were living in a condo in Ings Mills at that time, so we decided, well, yes, I want to be anointed, and it'd be nice to have the family and a couple friends in our home, in our condo. Then people started finding out about that, and they wanted to know if they could come to the anointing. And we said yes. So it got to the point where we moved it to the chapel.
Because you couldn't hold them all.
No. And then, by the time I had my healing mass set up, it was moved to the church. We had around 200 people.
Wow.
It was Father Pat, Father Paul, and Father Joe, and they anointed me in front of the entire congregation, the parish. And once again, I just felt that heat. And that was before we left for Seattle, and I believe I even said I really true that I've been healed, but I'm going to Seattle and we're going to see what's going to happen. And I went to Seattle and they sent me home.
Confirmation.
Yes.
You know, we don't believe these things can happen on a regular daily basis, do we? But then it takes a huge experience sometimes for us to believe. But your experience right now is helping other people believe too.
I know. It's taken me a while to get here to do it.
Well, you know, it's
I've shared it personally with people, and I share a lot on Facebook because I've been 26 years from diagnosis.
Wow.
I was given 5 years to live with no treatment, 10 to 15 with a transplant, and even the letter from Fred Hutchison from the doctor in Seattle to my doctor here said, Mr. Wilhelm probably has, and I don't know the terminology, 10 to 15 years to live. He didn't say to live, but that's what he meant. And it's 26 years. I go every 6 months, and
wow.
There's more to the story too.
Well, that's probably enough for right now, because I don't think anybody is probably able to just, I mean, we're probably all speechless, almost like I am, you know, to hear such a powerful story.
There's another miracle.
Yeah?
After this one.
Well, you know, do we have time for another one? You know, let's go ahead and hear it.
Okay, so we came home from Seattle in September. They told me to go home on September 10th. Or no, August 10th. So we were home, and the end of 1997, I relapsed. Once again, more bone marrow aspirations, where they check your bone marrow. 100% of the cells had the leukemia, Philadelphia chromosome. So I relapsed. Before we went to Seattle, I tried to get into a clinical trial for a new drug, experimental drug. I didn't qualify to get into the phase 1 clinical trial. So we started the process over again about, well, where am I going to go for the transplant, and the whole bit again. But then my oncologist called me and says, you have an opportunity to possibly qualify for a new phase 2 clinical trial on that drug that we try to get you into. So then we started going to Hopkins for testing. Same time, the healing ministry still praying with me. And by that time, Jackie had asked me if I would consider joining the healing ministry because they had a new class starting. So I said yes. So I joined the healing ministry, and we started the semester of training when I started going to Hopkins for these tests. And at Hopkins, the oncology doctor would tell me what they were looking for to qualify me. And when I would go to the healing ministry classes during the week, you had an opportunity to be prayed for by the entire class. And I would have them pray specifically for whatever the oncology nurse or doctor said. So as it turned out, I was qualified one of 1,000 people in the country for the phase 2 clinical trial of this new drug called ST-571. It turned out that, so I went through the clinical trial for 6 months, and then I was released from the clinical trial at the end of a year. My cell counts, 100% of the Philadelphia chromosome was in my cells. Within 3 months on this test drug, this experimental drug, my counts were going down. And then it was like at 50%, and then they continued to go down. When I left the trial, I still had a fairly high count, but in, I think it was 2002, that particular drug was approved by the FDA. At that time, it was the fastest drug in the history of FDA to be approved. It was approved in less than 2 years. I'm still on that drug today, 20 years after I started, because I started it in June of 2000. I'm still on that same miracle drug today. So I believe without God and the influence he has on research and doctors and everything, without God, I probably wouldn't be here. So it's not just faith, it's a combination of faith and the fact that you have the faith that God is going to lead the researchers and the doctors